This is Flipping the Script podcast, the soon-to-be #1 leadership podcast for purpose-driven leaders and great guest experts who give us a unique insight into what leadership looks like behind the scenes. I'm Shalia Stafford, your host, and I'm committed to helping you lead your challenges using leadership strategies to gain new perspectives, fuel your growth, and transform the way you execute on your success. Welcome back, everyone. It's Shalia here. Today, we're going beyond the surface level talk to explore a critical challenge that most well-intentioned leaders will face throughout their career, and that's burnout. We're kicking off today's episode with a global perspective all the way from London. I'm so excited to introduce our guest expert today, Sarah Ross, who is an international award-winning speaker and best-selling author who uses her own experiences with burnout and depression to help others avoid the dark place that she found herself in when she left the corporate world. She founded Your Reason to Breathe as a way to show those burning out at work that there are steps that can help turn the dark and depressing moment into an empowered and fulfilling life. Sarah, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
As a tradition here in the show, we like to kick off the show with a little fire away question so our audience can get to know you a little bit better. Shall we fire away?
Let's go.
What is something you are curious about right now?
So at the moment, I'm curious about sign language.
Ooh, why is that?
I saw a video of like a pop song with the with it all done in sign language. And it just fascinated me how you could bring across music without using tones or tempo or something like that.
That's so interesting. What do you wish you would have known when you first started out?
That there was a word called no.
Yes, that's all of us, huh?
And that actually speaking up that you wouldn't be able to achieve something, to not necessarily say, no, I can't do it, but to say, can we look at the priorities of some other things so that I can do what needs to be done now, would have been a really valuable lesson.
So what is something that makes you uncomfortable?
Shellfish, oysters.
Oh, I don't blame you on that one.
Even just the thought of it. No, that makes me uncomfortable.
And I think I can probably answer this question with knowing that answer now, but what is something you'll never do?
Order oysters. If fish has been cleaned or, deveined, then that's fine. But when it's just open the shell, squirt some lemon on it, and then slurp it, no thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that one. I can completely, that's all of us. Let's just put it there. We'll agree that everyone feels that way.
I'm normal.
Yes. So let's jump right into this because I was so excited to hear your expertise and learn more about the work that you're doing, because burnout is something that I personally experienced at work, and I know, and I've met many others who have too, but for a lot of us, burnout tends to just become as being part of the job. And we tend to dismiss what it is, and we just focus on getting better at what we're doing and trying to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But there are some pretty severe side effects of this if we don't pay attention. Do you mind giving us an idea of what you did when you were in the corporate world and how you got started with leading in the industry when it comes to burnout and really finding and resonating with your why?
So for me, burnout started as a kind of knock-on effect of my dream job. I was traveling the world, looking after 50 different countries for a pharmaceutical company. I was in ethics and compliance. So, I saw the worst of people in that job, but I had that Instagram lifestyle that everybody loves. I was traveling, I was in business class, I was, drinking champagne on the plane. And yet my body was already beginning to say, we need to slow down. We need to look at what this is doing. In the 2.5 years I had that job, I pulled back from my friends socially. I was just never around. And whilst at that time it was completely job driven, in the following years when I really started to burn out because, my health started to suffer, my relationship had broken up. The things that I started to do were then by choice to say, you know what, I don't want to see people because I'm struggling, and I don't want anyone to guess that I'm in this really dark place. And so when it came to, that point where my body was like, if you're not going to listen to the obvious signs, like you're not eating properly, you're not sleeping properly, then it started to manifest for me in the form of a migraine. And I'd had them for years, but like one or two every quarter. And suddenly it was 25 days a month.
That's intense.
I barely left my bed. I spent most of my time praying that the pain would disappear, not being able to see properly, and in my bed, and the only thing I really had for company were my thoughts. And when you're not going to work, when you're not, when the work is piling up, those thoughts get pretty negative, which then doesn't help with the burnout.
Wow. That's intense. 25 headaches a month, migraines, not just headaches. Isn't it interesting how our bodies start to show us signs that we tend to ignore?
Yes. And with my clients, always, I'll always ask them how quickly they would run for a phone charger if their battery got to, started to show red in the corner. And most of them would be like, oh, I'd have to get a charger and then find a plug. And you even see it, in offices or at conferences when people start to like lose connection, they're immediately looking for that, how do I recharge? And yet
Right.
we don't give our bodies the same respect in how often we look after them.
It's interesting that you say that because when I was experiencing this a level of burnout as well at work, it almost comes in different stages. In the beginning, it almost felt like I was deflecting it. It's part of the job, let me just get more coffee and I'll just spend a little bit more time focusing. And if I can strategize, then it'll get better. And then it goes into denial because people are saying, "Well, you look tired. What's wrong?" "Oh, I'm not tired. I'm just focusing. The light may be at the end of the tunnel. I just got to focus." And then that's when my body in the next stage really kicked in. And for me, I was experiencing muscle spasms to the point where I had to go in and get steroid shot because my shoulders had locked all the way to my ears and they couldn't come back down. And then when it really got serious for me was when I saw how much it interfered with my family. And then it got me really thinking, does burnout really start at that moment when our body kicks in, or did it start way earlier? We just weren't paying attention.
So genetically, we have a stress response that hasn't really altered much since we were cavemen.
Mm.
So we have this fight or flight, or some people say fight, flight, or freeze, that originates from when we were fighting animals and having to hunt to eat. And that was built to give us those, short bursts of time when our body would hyperreact. We would either run away or freeze, and probably be eaten by a tiger or a woolly mammoth or something. But the difference in those times was we only did it for short periods. They were always sprints. And what we're trying to do now with the lifestyles that we have is that same mechanism works and resets and allows the body to recharge if you only get stressed for short periods of time. When you have chronic stress, which is, what you and I were experiencing, that's when the body can't handle that pressure and stays in that stress mode. And the problem with flooding your body with cortisol is not only the damage it can do to certain processes in the body, but that it also starts to shut down processes that you need just to survive.
Is this more related to organizational weaknesses, work weaknesses, or just individual characteristics?
So I think the word you hear a lot is stress and resilience.
Yeah.
And, we'll just give our employees resilience training. And it's like, there's
Mm.
not one size fits all.
Yeah.
Some people get stressed just waking up in the morning, tying their shoes. Other people don't get stressed until they're jumping out of an aeroplane with a parachute tied to their back. So, how can you deliver resilience training to people who aren't always going to react in the same way to the same situation? What it really comes down to is all of those things that you mentioned. Individuals not feeling that they can say they have too much on their plate or that they're struggling. Organizations not building in communication channels where people can say, I need some help, or that weakness or asking for help is actually seen as a strong characteristic.
So, how do you know when to ask for help?
I think as soon as you start having a more intimate relationship, like you mentioned with the coffee machine, your phone, and you're not engaging with family, friends, is this time to start looking at how you've actually structured your life And, you hear people talk about work-life balance, and it's really simple. Get a piece of paper and 3 colored pens and literally put 1 to 24 down one side and the 7 days of the week along the top, and actually just, block out the periods that you spend with asleep, with your family and friends or socially, and how much time you spend at work. And if the predominant color on that piece of paper is the color that you've assigned to work, then you probably need to look at rebalancing some things.
So, Sarah, what did you end up doing in your journey? So, you were experiencing a lot of these migraines. What did you do next? How did this story evolve for you?
So I took a severance package because a lot of the policies that were designed to help me, the company didn't want to actually use. So I asked for flexible working, I asked for working from home, I asked to take a sabbatical, and the answer from HR and my manager to everything was no, because it meant they would have to restructure their headcount, or what if I left and they wouldn't get headcount back. None of it was about me. It was all about possible situations that might happen in the future. And what none of it took into consideration was, well, I'm at the point where there is no future if I'm in bed for 25 days a month.
Wow.
And so I ended up taking a severance package. And, I had left my dream job. My relationship was broken. I wasn't feeling particularly, enamored with life. I felt like a failure. And because I had internalized everything, nobody really knew that that's where I was. And so I came to the conclusion on my 37th birthday that I didn't want to see my 38th. There was just no point to
Oh,
it. And so I actually chose a date on which I would end my life.
wow. That gave me goosebumps.
I called it my expiry date. There was that
You even
date.
had a name for it.
I even had a name for it. And this is where it resonates with the work I do now, is that I'm a very logical thinking person, very left brain. And as long as I had this plan and this date in mind, then it got a little bit easier for me to go through my everyday. Because, it was like, well, I've planned how, I've planned when, I know where. Nobody knows about this, so I'm good. I've set everything up in advance, power of attorney over my bank accounts, over my apartment.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
it's almost macabre in the way I had gone about it, but everything was taken care of. And I had this period of time because I didn't want it to be close to anybody's birthdays or Christmas or anniversaries. And so I had picked this date carefully. And so it was sort of 3 or 4 months into the future. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to go and do some of those things I've always wanted to do. I'm going to go and see friends and family around the world that I will be saying goodbye to. And then I will go and volunteer in Vietnam at an orphanage for disabled children. That was something I had always wanted to do. And it's like, you know what? At least there I feel like I have some value. I can give them hugs. I can make them smile. I can color in with them or build Lego. And so for me, that was the place that I wanted to spend those last days.
Wow. Did you end up going?
I did. In total, I was in Vietnam for 4 months. The date would have been at the end of 3 months, but Christmas Day, because I was going to be away for over Christmas, I somehow came to the conclusion that my last Christmas should be as Santa Claus. And so, you know, I went to the Christmas street in the capital Hanoi, and there was a Father Christmas suit that fitted me perfectly. Now I'm 5'10" and quite a big girl, and so I couldn't even buy shorts and a t-shirt in the market. And yet here was a whole Santa costume, just
Aw.
as if it had been made for me. And so I spent Christmas Day as Father Christmas. Handing out chocolates, sweets, having my beard pulled. I spent the afternoon with some Vietnam War veterans. I believe we were reminiscing about their experience with Santa Claus when the Americans were there. We didn't have a common language, but we had biscuits and bananas. And I spent most of that day smiling, happy, which was such a almost foreign concept for me by now. So that I was like, wow, that was a pretty good day. And I hadn't had a pretty good day in a very long time. And just as we went to leave for the evening, the staff actually came and told us that one of the little girls was very sick. She was not expected to make it through the night, and that we should say our goodbyes before we left for the evening. And so I went into this room that I had never been in, and there was this little girl lying in a crib, and I leant over, and she put her hand up and put her fingers in my beard, and I
Hmm.
watched her breathe. And, that little girl, she's 4 or 5 and she's tiny. And she's still fighting for every single breath, even though she's only got a couple of hours left. And I think that was kind of one of those light bulb moments. It was like, I have everything that she could ever want. I'm educated, I've traveled the world, I have a family, I'm well. And yet I'm planning to give up. And yet she would give anything to be able to breathe for a few more hours. And so that was the point at which my life changed. I found a reason to breathe, and that's what she gave me. And then as part of the, healing journey that followed from that was to actually find what it was and how it would be me helping other people in a similar situation.
Wow. I mean, there is just so much to peel back there. What was going through your mind when you were on the plane traveling to this foreign country, knowing that this was going to be one of those the moment thinking it was going to be a final chapter for you? Did your family know what was going through your mind?
No, I had told absolutely nobody that there was a plan. I had worn a mask for months. I could always blame it on a migraine if I didn't go for dinner or meet up with people. In fact, people almost stopped asking because they were like, "Oh, she's probably got a migraine." I hadn't told anybody of what I was planning to do. It was very much, I didn't want to disappoint people. I didn't want them to know I was struggling. I didn't want to feel like a failure. And if I told people that's how I felt, I didn't want the pity or anything. Oh, you're not. It's just a bad period or whatever. And I didn't really see a way out of it other than, my plan. And I think on that plane ride there, and I was traveling business class because I had a air miles account that I
Right.
was slowly going through. You just kind of sat there and it's like, this is my last plane ride. I'm not
Wow.
going to get, when this plane lands, I'm not getting on a plane again.
What was that journey for you afterwards? What did you learn about yourself? And you've really done the work to dig to the root cause of where this all began and how it evolved, and now where this is taking you and how you're leading in this industry to help other executives and organizations who are experiencing burnout. What were some of the biggest lessons that you learned about yourself?
So my journey back was slightly unorthodox in that I actually started working with an acting coach
Oh, that's
because,
different.
yeah, so that Christmas day when I went back to my room, there was only one business card in my wallet and there was only one book in my room, and it was from this acting coach that I had met shortly before I got on that flight to Vietnam. And he had said to me during the session that I'd worked with him, I can help you make your dreams come true. Um, and he was the only person I remembered saying would help me. Now, I know from conversations, when I finally opened up about my story and have, told my family and friends, that any one of them would have helped me if I had asked. But in that moment, he was the only one that had openly said, or that I could remember had said. And so I started going to these acting masterclasses. And for the first one, I think I was like, well, I'm a businesswoman. This is just, I'm doing this, but it doesn't really apply to me. And then in a very short space of time, realized that what I was learning was how to dream
Hmm.
and how to see the world from a values perspective and a people perspective rather than just numbers on a spreadsheet. And that was the biggest difference. My coach had me get up on stage in Rome and sing Let It Go from Frozen. Um,
You have more courage than most of us.
he then had me do a stand-up comedy routine based on my own life in London. Um, then took me to a film festival where I was on the red carpet every night. This from a girl who didn't really, wear heels or dress up. I had to have makeup lessons before I even got there because I was like,
Oh, that's so funny.
yeah, it's like I can, I put mascara on. There we go. I'm done. And suddenly it was like, no, Sarah, you need like a proper makeup kit. It's like, oh, but what do I do with this brush and this pencil thing, And then, a year and a half later, I was at the Oscar parties, which was just crazy. But again, it was being surrounded by people. My classmates, would take any job or do anything to get an audition or to have a meeting with a casting director. And it was like, you don't see that in corporate. Everyone has a
No.
goal or an objective,
Yeah.
but nobody's dreaming. And it was that, to me, was the biggest change. I was like, you know what? There's a dream for me, and that was to eradicate burnout, to never have to read that somebody had done exactly what I had been planning to do, to make sure that it never gets to that point for them.
What point in our lives do you feel that we start to lose that ability to dream? Because as children, we develop that through our imagination and the stories and play. For you specifically, when do you think that you lost the dream and you just got stuck in this go, perform, strategize, and keep moving up the corporate ladder?
I think as soon as I applied for my first job, even as a law student, I still had all these dreams about saving the world.
Yeah.
But I wasn't planning to be a lawyer. And then I started to apply for training contracts to become a chartered accountant in the Big Four at the time. You're like, yeah. And I think at that point, suddenly it became, well, this training contract is for 3 years. At the end of 2 years, I will have passed all the exams. At the end of 3 years, I want to be made assistant manager, which means manager 2 years after that, possibly senior manager, earliest 2 years after that, and then managing a team and partner at 35. That was the kind of career path that you were given and told even as you started the job. And then as it would get to the point, it was like, you know what, I want to earn more money, or I want a different title, or I'm not getting the promotion here, I'll just shift to another company that will give me that. And I don't think any of them were really about dreams. It was about small pieces. I went and worked in Tokyo for 6 months for Walmart and saw different culture, different language. I was like, you know what, I want that to be part of my job. And so I came home from that assignment and started looking for jobs where I would be using my German. I was fluent in German, and about a year and a half after I came back, I moved to Switzerland for 10 years. All of those things driven by what is the next job? What is the next job title? How do I go up the corporate ladder? But never really thinking about anything else that was of importance to me.
I know for a lot of the purpose-driven leaders that we have listening to this, a lot of them are working relentlessly to climb the corporate ladder. They have the titles, they have the pay, they have the experience. They're well-intentioned, and without realizing, they get stuck in this cycle of burnout. And it's almost like we get rewarded for it.
Yeah.
Because what do we get after we pour our everything into the next thing? Another pay increase, another title.
Yeah. And I think that's, once you get stuck in that, and you do feel good when you get promoted, or there's more money in the bank, or you can buy your house, you've stopped renting. These are all things that you are striving for. It's not that those are bad things.
Right.
It's just that actually none of those things are really under your control, because somebody is telling you what to do every day. Somebody's giving you assignments or telling you the project and telling you to go and run the project, but somebody else is still in charge. And because of that element of someone else calling the shots, it's the things where you are in charge that then start to slip. You're not looking after yourself because, I've got a deadline at work, so I won't go camping with the family this weekend, or we'll put off that trip because we've got an IPO coming up, or we've got a new product launch, and everything is put off until after something happens. And that something is usually work related.
Is this about just essentially learning how to scale back and on your hours and setting some healthy boundaries? Or is there more to this that people can do if they're in the middle of this rut?
I think it would be very easy for me to say, figure out what's important to you and then structure your life around it. And that would be a flippant answer to what is, for some people could cost them their lives if they don't start to make some lifestyle changes.
Yes.
I think looking at your values and what's important to you, both professionally and personally, and then looking at your job and seeing where those align. So, for instance, integrity was a big value of mine, and clarity. And yet I was working for a pharmaceutical company who, when I joined, it was, you looked at their mission statement and that aligned with everything that I wanted to do. I wanted to help people.
Right.
And then gradually, as I worked for them for 7.5 years, you realize that everything they say also has the tagline of at the right profit margin.
Right. Right.
And suddenly, when I started going through my journey, it's like, why didn't it work with them? And it was because of this extra piece, because money had never been a value driver for me. I chose my jobs because of companies I wanted to work for, not because they were paying me the most money. And therefore, I ended up working for a company of whom money was probably one of the most important things. And so we had a disconnect there. And you can choose to take that two ways. One, you leave that company and find a company who is aligned to your values better, or you make the conscious decision to stay there because, it offers you the security which is important to you, or it offers you the benefits for your family. So you are getting medical and dental and, gym membership, for instance. And if those things are important to you, then you are making the conscious choice to to fulfill those values by staying in an environment which in some areas is not actually aligned with you. But for some people, that's a trade that they're willing to make. It's just about building up the other areas that say, the other thing that is important is that you see your son or daughter, pitch baseball every weekend. So making sure that that becomes non-negotiable. You won't work at the weekends on a project if it means sacrificing family time, or it's important for you to be married or in a long-term relationship. Well, that's going to need you to work on that as well.
How many people do you find have their values defined and are actively working at expressing those values, or maybe even testing them under pressure?
I think people know what's important to them, but I don't think people go down to the granular level of which part of it is that is the most important. So people will say, well, family, security, and health. And it's like, yeah, but what about those things?
Yeah.
Family, that I'm still married, I'm not divorced. My kids are in good schools, my kids are flourishing, we take vacation every year. It's kind of taking it down to another level and saying, okay, well, what does success look like in the value of family? What does success look like in the value of health? Is it that you haven't had a heart attack and you're 55, or is it that you can still run up and down the stadium stairs like you did when you were high school football team?
Right.
Or are you stood at the bottom going, I'm not even going to try and go up those stairs because I might have a heart attack?
I find that defining our values is such a critical part of our leadership, and it helps provide those guardrails to how we express our purpose and our impact in the world. But it certainly is something that doesn't happen overnight, and it's not black and white where you just 1, 2, 3 jot it down. A lot of it is really experimenting with it in the process. And I think that for myself, some of the places that I have found myself throughout life have been very challenging, and it's really put an immense amount of pressure on the values that I had that made me have to act quickly on whether this was something I truly valued or not, or if I needed to pivot and find out that there was actually a part of this that I valued and another part that I could work with, as an example. But just to kind of bring it back to family, it was until I was traveling a lot throughout the week. I mean, 85% of my time I was traveling. And, at first we find justifications for it, right? It's going to help the family and we're going to be able to do this and to do that. And we got to show grit to our kids. And
we want to teach them it's working hard is important.
Yeah, you got to teach yourself too. New experiences, all of this. And like you said, you're traveling all over places and it's this, and that. And then after so long, it really starts to internally, you get this tension that you have to pay attention to. And I started to realize I can't do this. I feel like I have to be something or someone different than what I truly value on the inside. And it was having to put that kind of pressure on that value that made me realize how much I value it. But is there anything that we can do before it gets to that immense pressure? to really practice expressing and defining and exploring our values?
I think being aware that, like you say, they can be tested and that we are making decisions around how we fulfill them. And so, sitting down with your family and saying, what are our family values? Sitting down with your team at work saying, how do we want this team to function? Values are not limited to, the family at home. It could also be your project team. Um, I had people in the last corporate job that I had parents on the team, but I also had, employees who were straight out of college and enjoying their first job. And so when you would say we've got a deadline coming up, um, there were some that were going to have to make real sacrifices of time with their kids, or projects that they had ongoing at home, renovations, house moves, and things. And for others in the team, it's like, oh well, I won't, I'll just have to meet them at the bar later. You know, it's a very different conversation, but by having the conversation about what was important for the team and what it would actually mean, going forward, how it would help our work or how it would help the environment we created for people,
Right.
so that everyone has, a common value of being part of that team.
I love that. And you mentioned such an important part there, having the self awareness around those values. I think that really sparked a light here in the conversation because a lot of it is just noticing what you're feeling as situations are happening around you that are giving you signs about your values. Right.
Yeah.
And it made me think upon several things. Also, I've always had the blessing to lead many teams too. And through some of the things that they've said, it's made me realize, wait, that's actually not how I want to be seen. I remember I had someone that I led once who told me, "Oh, you're always working, and I want to make sure that I get you at the right time because I don't want to interrupt what you're doing." And I thought, "Whoa, no." I want the time to always be available for you. And I don't want to see myself as someone who's constantly working that I don't even have time for my team.
Hmm.
And it was just noticing that comment from someone else and thinking about how I wanted it to fit in this bigger picture and in how I value the people that I led and how I do work helped me pay attention to how I'm expressing that value and if there's some changes that need to be made.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a good thing there, not having the time for them and not being available for them. It kind of goes to look at the things that you've cancelled, or, the American phrase, taken a rain check on. Um, who have you done that the most to? Has it been your family, your
Mm,
friends? Is there one part of your job that always seems to take a back seat? And for me, there was one person in my team who I seemed to change their one-to-one with me every week because of other project commitments. And I was like, but there were other people in the team that I would work around their one-to-ones, and just being aware of that and saying, you know what, I commit that all the team get the same level from me, that when they have that on their calendar, they know that that is their hour with me, and these are the things that we will go through in that time. And it was more than just, where are your projects? It was about, how are you settling in? What learning and development do we need to deliver? You're looking at everything from making sure that their values are met, because the last thing you want is to lose an employee. Now, in my case, I think when you totaled everything up, it probably cost that company more than $250,000 to lose me. You know,
Yep.
and you go, well, how many of your projects could take you losing somebody and the project being put on hold until you had recruited a replacement? Because we now run such lean organizations, we don't necessarily have the succession plan which says somebody else can step in tomorrow and do that job
Mm,
just as well as the other person. And, in some companies, it may be that somebody steps up, doesn't add into rim role, but you put them under extra stress because they're now having to deliver on a project that they probably weren't best suited for. Or you bring in an outside consultant, you pay them a fortune, but they have none of the team knowledge,
right.
experience of your company. And so you're already playing catch up. Now, those are all the costs of losing an employee because you can't help them through a mental health issue like depression or burnout. And I would just challenge people to say, well, are you even trying to?
That's so true. And what do you see is typically the cost that organizations have to pay when they don't put systems in place to help their employees and their workforce across the nation who is dealing with burnout.
And I think here in the UK, the last statistics that I saw were that 65% of all work absences are actually due to stress, burnout, and depression. So even if they're being logged as flu, toothache, that actually 65%, so 2 out of every 3 work absence is actually related to mental health issues. People just don't want to say that that's what it is.
Many of us don't tend to see high-level executives such as yourself. Think of high-level executives dealing with burnout. We don't talk about it. Why do you think there's such a stigma around it?
I think that nobody is willing to have a conversation where they say they're struggling, because so much, and it's very prevalent at the sort of senior exec level, the C-suite,
Yes.
but it does go down further into the business of, used to work in compliance and ethics, and you would read every week the movers in the compliance industry, and so and so is now the head of compliance at this company after only a year and a half at their
Yeah.
previous company. And when you have that as the information that you're getting about what happens in the business, what you don't want to say is, I'm struggling to deliver here, because you then say, you almost put on hold any promotion or
Yes.
increase at that company, but you will make a sideways move because you start to feel that you can't deliver at a higher level because you've struggled in company A. So when you do look to move to company B, you don't look for something that stretches you. You look at for the same position and go, okay, well, I'll take a little time and just work my way into it. But because you come in at that lower level than maybe you are experienced for, you suddenly have to prove that you're experienced again.
So how can we start the conversation if we know someone who is in the middle of burnout or even in the beginning stages? How do we start that conversation with them?
It's really difficult, and it took me a long time to ask for help. But I think it's about, if you notice somebody is struggling, is to not stop at, are you okay? Yes, I'm fine. I'm fine hides a multitude of sins. But don't push them, push them, push them. Are you sure you're okay? You don't look okay. You're looking tired. It's picking up on those little signs. They are tired. There's maybe more spelling mistakes in their emails. The person that was always happy and heading off to the gym, suddenly you've never seen them with a gym bag. And having those conversations about being people, oh, I haven't seen you going to the gym. Have you got an injury or something? You don't have to have a conversation that says, are you burnt out? Like, are you just not going to the gym because you just can't handle it anymore? It's just about having normal everyday conversations so that people know that they have support around them, and using whatever tools you have in place. So, for senior managers, for the C-suite, look at how many policies you have in HR and actually say, would we be willing to use them if somebody asked for help? Because you look at governance and it says, oh, you should have a policy, a code of conduct and a values and ethic policy and how to act and everything. But if you're not going to do anything with them, they are just pieces of paper.
That's a great point, because many organizations have these, right? But then when it comes down to it and their values and policies are put under pressure, they don't respond in the way that we think they do.
Yeah.
Is there any examples of organizations that you know who are doing great work in this that would allow some of our leaders to really study how, when it comes down to needing these policies and procedures and these values to come into play, these are organizations that have acted, have responded to their values when put under pressure, have actually lived them out and delivered to their workforce what they needed in order to support them beyond their career? Because when we experience burnout, it doesn't just affect us in our role now, it affects us in every role that we play a part in.
I'm probably going to get this wrong. There is a yogurt type in the US. Is it Chobani?
Yogurt, yes. Oh, I love that.
Where actually I believe all the employees are shareholders in the company. There is also a company where the CEO cut his own wages so that everybody and his staff earned a minimum. I believe at the time it was $50,000 or $70,000. Now, it may have been US, it could have been Canadian, but Setting up the culture where people aren't struggling to provide for their family means they can be more productive at work when people aren't living paycheck to paycheck. There's numerous companies that have won awards for best place to work, inspiring place to be, employees.
Right.
All of those are doing things slightly differently. And it's not necessarily about having bean bags and, slides instead of stairs, but it's about having those conversations. And one of the things that I talk to corporations about is your corporate social responsibility, the part that goes into your annual report, which is usually for a pharma company. How many free doses of medicine did we give? Or how many vaccines did we donate to this company actually starts closer to home. You wouldn't want to have to explain to your shareholders why one of your employees killed themselves and why the project was then delayed because you didn't have anything in place to have those conversations with them around mental health or employee assistance programs. The shareholders would be more shocked with that than they would if you happen to miss a profit target. But our conversations predominantly are still around, well, what is the dividend going to be, and what is the forecast for the next year or the next quarter?
And that brings up another point that you had touched on earlier, how a lot of times it's a lot of senior executives are in the middle of burnout. And if we really want to help our workforce, we have to start at the top. We have to make sure that our leadership at the top is getting the assistance that they need and the support to really lead in a way that is healthy for not just themselves, but for the rest of the workforce that they're responsible for. And so how have you worked with organizations in the past?
So very much like what you've talked about, what message are you giving from the top? And that starts from the CEO. Does your CEO actually switch off his phone? Is he still sending emails at 11 o'clock at night? Because whatever he models to his company will be picked up by his employees.
Yes.
If you get emails from him at every hour of the day, then people will fall into the trap of responding at every hour of the day.
Yes.
There's reasons why, there's one of the big car manufacturers in Europe has actually made it company policy not to email after 6 o'clock in the evening. And employees are not expected to respond. France, for instance, has now made it illegal. They've actually passed law that says
Really?
employees do not have to respond out of office hours.
Wow.
And those sort of things go, wow, that's interesting. That challenges how we work. But then you kind of look at things and go, yeah, but what about those people that are contracted to work 40, 45 hours a week and actually end up putting in 80 or 90? Now, that comes down to us trying to run organizations with too few people. If you have a lawyer who's working 90 hours a week, then you need another lawyer. That workload is for two people, and it's not a reflection on the first lawyer not being good enough or not being able to deliver. It's the simple facts of these jobs take a certain number of hours to do.
Yes.
And therefore, are you paying people for the contract that you gave them, or are you just saying, look, I'll give you this amount of money, but you will work every hour that I expect you and you will not complain? Because then burnout is not an option. Burnout will happen, and you'll have people that are trying to deliver something that contractually they're not even bound to do.
Is that something that you feel is true for most of us, that we will experience burnout at some point?
I think everybody will experience a period where they are not balanced.
Yeah.
I have a quiz on my website, and there's like 15 factors, 15 questions around, are you burning out? And it's the combination of those factors. So we will all go through periods where we don't sleep particularly well. We don't tend to have very hot weather here in Britain. And so as soon as we have like 2 or 3 days going on to a week where we have like temperatures in the 90s and 100s, none of us sleep particularly well, and we moan and everything about it. But when you couple not sleeping properly with not exercising, not eating properly, drinking too much coffee, pulling away socially, all of those combinations start to lead to burnout. But by changing just one thing, so making sure that you do rest, sleep or rest or take time away from your screens, can actually reset a lot of the other processes.
So, Sarah, as we get close to wrapping up here, I do have a question for you. How did 10 pair of socks teach you to fail?
As I said, I was at the orphanage in Vietnam for 4 months. In the 2 months leading up to that Christmas day, I don't really remember much of what happened. I was in a very negative place. I don't really have any memories. But in the 2 months after, as I kind of finished my time there and then went back to my life, there were a lot of lessons that these orphans who have absolutely nothing were teaching me on a daily basis. And there was a small boy who had Down syndrome and loved to dance. And he can only go outside, or he can only go to the disco that we would run once a week when he has shoes on. And so I had arrived, and he was really, really depressed. Like, he was just sat in the corner. He wasn't his normal, like, happy self. And he couldn't, like, his shoes were too big. So shoes tend to just get in the orphanage, the shoes for everybody, and they just kind of swap them around and everything. And he suddenly had a pair of shoes that were too big for him. And it was quite cold, so the staff had given me this bag of socks. Now, socks is something that doesn't usually get donated when people are looking at, handing on clothes or things. And so socks are like gold dust in the orphanage. And I have a bag of socks with 20 pairs of socks in them and 20 children. And so I start with Duck, who's the little boy who wants to dance, give him some socks, and then make my way around the room. And, I'm proud of myself because all of these children don't really want to wear socks. So they're being thrown at me or pulled off or eaten in some cases.
Oh my goodness.
And I get to the end and I've done all 20 pairs of socks and my bag is empty. And I turn around and 10 of the children aren't wearing socks anymore. And I'm like, oh, this is a pretty bad success rate for socks. But over in the corner is Duck and this pile of socks. And he sat there and he put on one pair of socks and he tried his shoes and they didn't fit. And he tried a second pair of socks and he didn't fit. And he literally just followed that process until his shoes fit him. And he was like up and dancing and jumping. And it was 10 pairs of socks.
Wow.
And I realized some months later that what had actually been happening is the same thing as an engineer would go through. You prepare something, you test it, and it doesn't work, so you change one thing and see if it works. And that's all he was doing with the socks. Now, Duck doesn't really talk. He's never been to school. He's certainly never read a book on engineering, but he was following a logical process, and he got to his goal at the end. And so for me, watching him go through that was probably the biggest lesson in how to fail, because it didn't stop him. When his shoes didn't fit after 3 pairs of socks, he just went, okay, what can I do now? Well, I'll try a 4th pair of socks. And it's that attitude that many of us and many corporations need to have, instead of just, making this is the deadline and we must have it by then. It's like, well, why not embrace the failures?
Yes, because failure is part of the journey.
Exactly.
And when we cover up that part of the journey and we leave it to just be a straight shot to success, we hurt so many people along the way who are achieving much but don't know how to recognize it in the moment.
Yeah. And, of all the children I interacted with, Duck was probably not the one that I thought was going to teach me anything. And yet, over the months, and, I'm slowly writing a book about all these lessons that I learned, was, what? That also happens in the corporate world.
Yes.
We only ask the people who have the right title or have the right experience in the company. But what if, I had a personal assistant at one point, and she sat in on a project once, and afterwards she said to me, why aren't we doing this? And I was like, well, what do you mean? And it turns out she had an MBA. She was just, in order to get into the company, was working her way up through the process. It's like, so I had this resource on my team that I didn't even know about because I had never asked a question.
Wow, look at that. How many times do we end up making that assumption on others?
Yeah. Not everybody working in a coffee shop is just working in a coffee shop. Some of them are probably studying astrophysics or, business management. there are so many ways to find answers out there, and it all starts with just having more powerful conversations.
Keep an open perspective. Everyone is a part of our journey, even those that we don't think are.
Absolutely.
Sarah, our leaders enjoy having their leadership challenged. Based on our conversation today, what challenge would you leave to our audience to explore with what they just learned?
I would set them the challenge of, do you really know your team? And what are the values that those people have? Because, it's easy when you're the boss to stand there and say, look, if we all just stay an extra couple of hours, we'll get this done, and then we're finished. But what if those extra couple of hours, someone has a soccer team that they coach, someone else is the carer for their, parent, sister, child? What are you actually asking people to give up when you ask them for just another hour, or can you just stay a little bit later and finish it? And so the challenge would be, how well do you know your team more than their title and what they do every day?
So for the organizations looking to get in contact with you, how can they connect with you?
So you can reach me via yourreasontobreathe.com. We have a contact form on there. My email address is also on there, sarah@yourreasontobreathe.com. So you can reach out via that.
I'll be sure to include that in the show notes. Sarah, thank you so much for being our guest expert today. Your journey has been truly inspiring, and even more, your courage to step into what you were feeling, explore it, and now be a source of inspiration for those of us who are seeking to level up our leadership in the way that you have.
Thank you. And thank you for having me.
If you found even the smallest nugget of wisdom in this episode, share it with a friend and your friend will thank you. Let's continue the conversation with like-minded leaders and join us on Facebook at Go Flip the Script. Until next time, I challenge you to incorporate what you learned today to evolve your leadership impact.